Houska Castle stands in the north of Prague and was built in the second half of the 13th century. It is assumed that the castle was built on the orders of Ottokar II of Bohemia, who ruled from 1253 to 1278, and that it was meant to be an administration centre. It's an odd castle in that it's not near any water source, not near any trade routes. It has no external fortifications. There's no kitchen in the castle. And it's built in an area of forests, swamps, and mountains. In fact, this castle has no strategic purpose at all. But this is where the legend of Houska Castle takes over. According to stories, the castle, or more accurately, the chapel in the castle, is built on top of a large hole, which is supposedly a gateway to hell. The legend goes to say that the chasm is so deep that no one can see the bottom of it, and that half animal, half human creatures would crawl out of the hole and attack locals, dragging them back to the pit. When construction was started on the castle, prisoners who had been sentenced to death were brought to the hole and given a choice. They could be executed as planned, or they could allow themselves to be lowered into the pit and report back what they saw. If they did this, then they would be given a full pardon and set free. The first volunteer was attached to a rope and lowered slowly into the darkness. A few seconds after he had disappeared from view into the pit, he began to scream and beg to be pulled back out. He was still screaming when he was pulled over the edge of the hole and back to the surface. He looked as though he had aged 30 years in those few seconds, and his hair had turned white. He was so disturbed by what he had seen that they took him to a local insane asylum to be cared for. He died 2 days later from unknown causes. He never got the chance to reveal what he had seen when lowered into that hole. Nothing is known about any further prisoners being lowered in to the hole, and the legend only mentions this first man. But I'm sure that it's safe to assume they wouldn't have stopped at one, especially when it was unsuccessful and they didn't have the answers they wanted. I'm sure that they would have kept on going. I mean, it's a duke that was doing this, that was lowering people into the hole, and these were prisoners sentenced to death. So I'm sure they just kept going until they ran out of people. But it's only the first one we have any records of. The castle was then constructed above the pit to keep the evil contained within it. Defensive walls were built in, with all the defenses facing inwards instead of out, so that all the demons would be trapped inside the walls. As if a pit to hell filled with demons and strange beasts isn't enough, there is more to the story of Houska Castle. During World War II, the castle was occupied by the Nazis, who supposedly carried out occult experiments in the castle, along with keeping an extensive occult library at the castle. Now, it's said that they also brought women there to try and produce their perfect race. So it was one of their basically breeding grounds. Some locals believed that they were actually using the powers of hell in their experiments. Now, when they vacated the castle, they actually destroyed everything that they'd taken there. So the entire libraries, records of their experiments. So we don't actually know exactly what they did there. We've only got sort of hearsay. But on top of all this, if we come to modern day, Visitors have reported seeing several ghosts inside the castle. Now, there's supposed to be a strange bullfrog human dog hybrid, an old woman, and a headless horse. Some people even say that they've seen the remains of demonic beasts. People who visited the castle at night also claim to have heard scratching on the lower floors, as if demons were still trying to claw their way out. Others have reported hearing a chorus of screams coming from beneath the floor. The chapel itself is still much as it would have been, including the original frescoes on the walls. Now, most is exactly what you'd expect for a 13th century chapel. So you've got the Archangel Michael fighting a dragon, Michael holding a sword and scales, the crucifixion, St. Christopher, so all of your typical 13th century religious art. But there is one fresco that stands out, and it seems extremely out of place. It depicts a female centaur, and in case you didn't, and by the way she's holding her bow and arrow, she's a left-handed female centaur. Now, this is strange for a few reasons. Firstly, this is a pagan image. The centaur doesn't appear in the Bible at all. It's a purely pagan image. So why would they put a centaur on the walls of a Christian chapel? Secondly, any depiction of a female centaur is rare. If you look through art from the period that people believed in the Greek gods, and depictions of centaurs are all male, exclusively. And in the stories, the Greek stories, they are all male. You don't get stories of female centaurs. Finally, she's left-handed. Now, this is the only known depiction of a left-handed centaur. Generally, they're all painted or drawn as being right-handed. So what I would point out here is where the church was concerned at the time, left-handedness was associated with Satan. So it's a pagan image of a female centaur who's left-handed. I don't know if maybe they're trying to get that paganism was followed in that area and that's what led the gateway to hell being opened. It's possible, but that's just my theory. Now, the current owner of the castle has said they have no intention of taking up the chapel floor to find out what lies beneath. They claim two reasons for this. First of all, they want to avoid damaging the frescoes on the wall because they're 13th century frescoes. They are amazingly beautiful and definitely something that needs to be preserved, and digging up the floor may affect them. Secondly, what if the chapel is protecting the world from demons? It's better safe than sorry, isn't it? Now, if you want to go to Houska Castle, it is open for tourists, so it is a place you can visit. It's not easy to get to via public transport. There's only one bus. But be warned, some people who drive to Houska have said that when they come back, their cars won't start. Let's hope you don't get stuck there overnight.